The crystal chandelier above the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel cast fractured rainbows across the marble floor as I stood frozen, my champagne glass trembling in my hand. The words my Uncle Richard had just screamed across the crowded charity gala still hung in the air like poison gas. "You're nothing but a disgrace to this family, Madison. A worthless little nobody who thinks she belongs with decent people." 300 of Chicago's elite had turned to stare. The orchestra had stopped mid-note. Even the waitstaff had paused, their silver trays suspended in shock. But it was the look of smug satisfaction on my cousins' faces, Jessica and Brandon, that cut deepest. They stood behind their father like loyal soldiers, their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos gleaming under the lights. I was 26 years old, and in that moment, I felt like the same scared 16-year-old girl they'd thrown out of their mansion a decade ago. But they had no idea who I'd become. The rain hammered against the windows of the Mitchell family estate as I pressed my ear to the mahogany door of Uncle Richard's study. Inside, voices rose and fell like angry waves. "She has to go, Richard." That was my Aunt Caroline, her voice sharp as broken glass. "The girl is nothing but a burden. Her parents left her nothing, absolutely nothing, and we've been feeding her out of charity for 6 years. She's family, Caroline." My uncle's voice was tired, resigned. "She's a mouth to feed with no return on investment. Jessica and Brandon have their college funds, their trust funds. What does Madison have? Nothing. She'll drag our children down with her mediocrity." I was 16, standing in my worn pajamas from Walmart while my cousins slept in silk from Paris. My parents had died in a car crash when I was 10, leaving behind nothing but debt and a daughter nobody wanted. Uncle Richard, my father's brother, had taken me in, but his wife and children had made it clear from day one that I was an unwelcome guest in their world. "The application deadline for boarding school has passed," Uncle Richard said weakly. "Then she can stay with your mother in that retirement community. Or better yet, let her figure it out herself. She's 16, old enough to work, old enough to understand that charity has its limits." The door opened suddenly, and I stumbled backward. Aunt Caroline stood there, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed even at midnight, her cold blue eyes taking in my eavesdropping with satisfaction. Perfect timing, Madison. She stepped aside, revealing Uncle Richard slumped behind his desk, unable to meet my eyes. "We were just discussing your future. Or rather, your lack of one in this house." Jessica appeared at the top of the grand staircase, her silk nightgown flowing around her like she was descending from heaven. At 17, she was everything I wasn't: blonde, beautiful, and utterly convinced of her own superiority. "Are you finally kicking her out?" she asked with the casual cruelty only teenagers could muster. "Thank God. Maybe now I can have friends over without being embarrassed by my charity case cousin." Brandon, 15 and already showing signs of the Mitchell family arrogance, laughed from behind her. "She can move to the South Side where people like her belong." "Pack your things," Aunt Caroline said, her voice as cold as the October wind. "You have until morning." I looked at Uncle Richard, hoping for some last-minute intervention, some spark of the man who used to play catch with my father in their childhood backyard. But he just stared at his desk, a broken man under his wife's iron rule. That night, I packed my life into 2 garbage bags and walked out into the Chicago dawn with $43 in my pocket and nowhere to go. The Greyhound bus to Milwaukee cost $38. I had 5 left when I arrived, but I also had something the Mitchells had never bothered to discover: my mother's old address book, hidden in the lining of my suitcase. Maria Santos had been my mother's roommate in college, and when I showed up at her modest apartment with tears streaming down my face and my whole story spilling out, she didn't hesitate. She took me in, helped me get my GED, and watched me work 3 jobs while taking community college classes. "Mija," she told me one night as I studied accounting textbooks at her kitchen table, "the best revenge is success. But not just any success, the kind they can't ignore." She was right, but it took me 10 years to understand what she really meant. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business and finance. While my cousins were partying their way through expensive colleges on daddy's money, I was building something they couldn't buy or inherit: A brain that understood numbers, markets, and most importantly, people's weaknesses. My first job was at a small investment firm in Milwaukee. Within 2 years, I was their top performer. Within 4, I'd saved enough to start my own hedge fund. By my 25th birthday, I was managing over $200 million in assets. But I didn't stop there. I started buying properties. Not just any properties, but strategic ones. Office buildings in downtown Chicago. The strip mall where Brandon's girlfriend's family had their restaurant. The apartment complex where Jessica's friend's parents lived. I bought them quietly through shell companies and trusted intermediaries. I also started a nonprofit, the Second Chance Foundation, focused on helping displaced youth. It grew quickly, attracting major donors and media attention. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was helping kids like I used to be while the family that abandoned me basked in their inherited wealth. But the crown jewel of my empire was something none of them could have imagined. I owned the mortgage on the Mitchell family estate. Uncle Richard had refinanced it 3 years ago when his construction business started failing. The loan had been packaged and sold so many times that by the time it landed in my portfolio, even he had forgotten who held his debt. But I knew everything about their finances, their business dealings, their secrets. I'd been watching them for years, waiting for the perfect moment. And tonight, at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala, the same charity my foundation was sponsoring, that moment had finally arrived. I'd chosen my outfit carefully for tonight, a simple black dress from Nordstrom, elegant but not flashy. I wanted to blend in, to be unremarkable. My hair was pulled back in a modest bun, and I wore minimal jewelry, just my mother's small diamond studs and the vintage Cartier watch I'd bought myself for my 25th birthday. The Mitchells, by contrast, had arrived like they owned the place. Uncle Richard in his custom Armani tux, Aunt Caroline dripping in diamonds, Jessica in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. Brandon had brought his new wife, a vapid socialite named Tiffany who laughed too loud and drank too much. I'd been standing near the silent auction tables, watching them hold court near the bar, when Jessica spotted me. "Oh my God," she whispered to her mother, but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Is that Madison?" Aunt Caroline's eyes went wide, then narrowed. She whispered something to Uncle Richard, who turned and stared at me like I was a ghost from his past. They approached as a pack, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. "Madison." Uncle Richard's voice was tight. "What are you doing here?" "Attending a charity gala," I said simply, taking a sip of my champagne. "Same as you." Jessica laughed, that cruel, tinkling sound I remembered from my teenage years. "A charity gala? Madison, these tickets cost $5,000 each. Did you sneak in through the kitchen?" The circle of onlookers grew larger. I recognized several faces from the society pages, people whose investment portfolios I managed, whose business deals I'd financed, whose children attended schools my foundation supported. But they didn't recognize me. Why would they? I was just another young woman in a black dress. "I'm sure there's been some mistake," Aunt Caroline said, her voice carrying that familiar condescending tone. "This event is for donors and supporters of the Children's Hospital. Perhaps you're looking for the volunteer entrance." Brandon had been drinking heavily, and alcohol always made him meaner. "Jesus, Madison, you look exactly the same as when you were 16. Still shopping at Target, I see." His wife, Tiffany, giggled. "Is this the cousin you told me about? The one who had to live with you like some kind of foster kid?" "Not anymore," Uncle Richard said firmly. "We haven't been in contact for years. For good reason." The crowd was pressing closer now, sensing drama. I recognized Mrs. Pemberton from the hospital board, Mr. Davidson from the Tribune, Sarah Chun from Channel 7 News. All of them watching, waiting for the show to continue. Madison was troubled, Aunt Caroline explained to the gathering crowd, her voice taking on that sympathetic tone wealthy people used when discussing the less fortunate. "We tried to help her, of course. Took her in when her parents died, gave her every opportunity. But some people just can't rise above their circumstances." "She was always jealous of Jessica and Brandon," Uncle Richard added, warming to the narrative. resentful that we couldn't give her the same advantages as our biological children. It became unpleasant. Jessica stepped closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that carried perfectly across the marble floor. She actually tried to steal from us. Can you imagine? We gave her a home, and she repaid us by going through our jewelry boxes, our purses. That's when we knew we had to make the hard choice. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face calm, neutral. Let them dig their own grave. That's terrible, gasped Mrs. Pemberton. How difficult that must have been for you. It was heartbreaking, Aunt Caroline said, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. But we had to protect our own children. You understand. Brandon was really warming up now, emboldened by the audience and the alcohol. She probably thought she could come here tonight and embarrass us. Make some kind of scene. Well, she's certainly dressed for it, Tiffany said with a cruel laugh. I think that dress is from the Nordstrom clearance rack. The crowd laughed, not with real amusement, but with the uncomfortable tittering of people watching a public execution they couldn't look away from. Uncle Richard stepped forward, his face flushed with righteousness and champagne. Madison, I think it would be best if you left. Quietly. Before security has to escort you out. Actually, Jessica added, her eyes glittering with malice, before you go, I think you owe us an apology.
For all the trouble you caused.
For the lies you probably tell people about us. The crowd murmured approval. Here was justice, they thought. Here was a family standing up to an ungrateful charity case who had the audacity to crash their exclusive world. Brandon took another gulp of whiskey and stepped even closer, his voice rising. 10 years, Madison. 10 years you could have apologized. Could have shown some gratitude for what we did for you. Instead, you disappear, and now show up here like some kind of what? I asked quietly. Like you belong here. Uncle Richard exploded, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Like you're one of us. But you're not, Madison. You never were and you never will be. You're nothing but a disgrace to this family, a worthless little nobody who thinks she belongs with decent people. The silence that followed was deafening. 300 of Chicago's most powerful people stared at me, waiting for me to break down, to run, to confirm everything they'd just heard about the poor little charity case who'd forgotten her place. Instead, I smiled. Excuse me, miss. The voice came from behind me. I turned to see James, my personal assistant, approaching with his usual professional demeanor. At 35, James was the perfect PA. Discreet, efficient, and utterly unflappable. He was also one of the few people who knew the full extent of my business empire. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, nodding politely to the Mitchells, but there's been an urgent call from the Singapore office. The Henderson acquisition needs your immediate attention. Jessica laughed again. Singapore office? Madison, is this some kind of joke? Did you hire an actor? James looked genuinely confused. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Are you suggesting Ms. Wells is not? Wells? Uncle Richard interrupted. Her name is Madison Clark. She's my brother's daughter. No, sir, James said patiently. Madison Wells, CEO of Pinnacle Investment Group and founder of the Second Chance Foundation. I've been her personal assistant for 3 years. The crowd stirred. Several people pulled out their phones, fingers flying over screens. I watched Mrs. Pemberton's eyes widen as she stared at her phone, then at me, then back at her phone. Oh my God, she whispered. You're M.A. Wells. The name rippled through the crowd like wildfire. M.A. Wells, the mysterious young financier who'd made headlines for her Midas touch with investments and her foundation's groundbreaking work with displaced youth. I'd kept a deliberately low profile, avoiding photos whenever possible, letting my work speak for itself.
But the secret was out now.
That's impossible, Aunt Caroline said, but her voice had lost its confidence. Madison is nobody. She's nothing. Sarah Chen from Channel 7 stepped forward, her professional instincts kicking in. Ms. Wells, I interviewed you last month about your foundation's new program. You donated $20 million to children's charities this year alone. Mr. Davidson from the Tribune was frantically scrolling through his phone. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Your hedge fund returned 42% last year. You're on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. There must be some mistake, Uncle Richard said weakly, but sweat was beading on his forehead now. No mistake, came another voice from the crowd. This one belonged to Harold Morrison, president of First National Bank. Madison, Ms. Wells, financed our expansion into Milwaukee. Her investment saved 300 jobs. More voices joined in, each revelation hitting the Mitchells like a physical blow. She owns the Millennium Tower downtown. Her foundation just built that new youth center on the south side. She's the anonymous donor who paid for the hospital's new pediatric wing. Jessica's face had gone white. But you were nothing. You had nothing. I had $43, I said quietly. When you threw me out with nothing but garbage bags and spite, I had $43 and the desire to never be powerless again. Brandon's wife was staring at her phone in horror. Babe, she whispered, she's worth like $300 million. The crowd was buzzing now, the pieces falling into place. Here was the mysterious philanthropist they'd all heard about, the woman whose foundation was revolutionizing youth services, the financial genius who'd turned a community college education into one of the largest privately held investment firms in the Midwest. And here was her family, who just humiliated her in front of Chicago's elite. Madison, Uncle Richard started, his voice cracking. We didn't know. You didn't know because you never bothered to find out, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent ballroom. You were so certain I was nothing that you never considered I might become something. Aunt Caroline was fumbling with her purse, her hands shaking. We made mistakes. We were young. We didn't understand. You weren't young, I interrupted. You were adults. I was the child. I was the one who needed protection, guidance, love. Instead, you threw me away like garbage because I wasn't profitable enough for your investment. The crowd was hanging on every word now. Phones were recording, flash photography, lighting up the ballroom. The Mitchells were being captured in their moment of ultimate humiliation, and they knew it. But the best part, I continued, reaching into my small clutch purse, is that you're still depending on me. You just don't know it yet. I pulled out a folded document and handed it to Uncle Richard. His hands were shaking as he opened it. That's the deed to your house, Uncle Richard. The house you refinanced 3 years ago when your construction business started failing. The house you were about to lose to foreclosure until I bought your mortgage and restructured your payments. The color drained from his face completely. You own our house? I own a lot of things, I said calmly. Your mortgage. The building where Brandon's architectural firm rents office space. The strip mall where your girlfriend's family restaurant operates, Jessica. The country club where you all play golf every weekend. Each revelation hit them like a physical blow. Jessica was openly crying now, her perfect makeup streaming down her cheeks in black rivers. Why? Brandon whispered. Why would you help us if you hate us so much? Because, I said, looking around at the crowd of Chicago's most powerful people, I wanted to be absolutely certain that when this moment came, when you stood in front of everyone who matters and called me worthless, you would be completely, utterly, devastatingly wrong. The video went viral within hours. Not just locally, nationally. Entitled Family Humiliates Self-Made Millionaire became the top trending topic on Twitter. The footage, captured by a dozen phones, showed everything. Their cruel mockery, their lies about my past, their shocked faces when my identity was revealed. But it was the follow-up reporting that truly destroyed them. Sarah Chen from Channel 7 did a week-long investigation into the Mitchell family's claims about my past. She interviewed Maria Santos, who still lived in Milwaukee and was happy to tell the real story of how she'd taken in a devastated 16-year-old with nothing but garbage bags and determination. She interviewed my high school guidance counselor, who remembered the brilliant student who'd worked 3 jobs while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. She found my community college professors, who spoke glowingly about my work ethic and intelligence. Most damaging of all, she interviewed former Mitchell family employees, housekeepers, gardeners, drivers, who'd witnessed my treatment over the years. They told stories of a child forced to do extra chores while her cousins played, of deliberately being excluded from family photos and vacations, of overhearing Aunt Caroline telling friends that I was the help's daughter when they forgot I was actually family. The Tribune ran a front-page feature on my foundation's work, contrasting it with Uncle Richard's failing construction business, which was under investigation for cutting corners on low-income housing projects. The reporter noted the irony of a woman who'd been abandoned by her family now dedicating her fortune to helping other abandoned children. But the social destruction was even swifter and more complete. Jessica's wedding to her pharmaceutical heir fiancé was called off within a week. The footage of her calling me a thief and mocking my appearance had been particularly damaging. Her future in-laws wanted nothing to do with someone who'd been exposed as a cruel social climber on national television. Brandon's architectural firm lost 3 major contracts when clients decided they didn't want to be associated with someone who'd been caught on camera mocking his own family member for being poor. His wife, Tiffany, filed for divorce within the month, claiming she'd been deceived about his character. Uncle Richard's construction business collapsed entirely when the scandal made it impossible to secure new projects. Who wanted to hire a contractor who'd thrown out his dead brother's child and then lied about it publicly? Aunt Caroline, who'd built her social status on charity work and community involvement, found herself persona non grata at every organization she'd ever joined. The country club revoked their membership. The symphony board asked her to step down. Even their church asked them to consider finding a new place of worship. But I wasn't done. 3 months after the gala, I made my last play. I called in the Mitchell family mortgage. It was perfectly legal. There was an acceleration clause for reputational damage that might affect property values, and their public humiliation certainly qualified. I gave them 30 days to pay the full balance, $2.8 million. They couldn't do it, of course. Uncle Richard's business was bankrupt, their credit was destroyed, and no bank would lend to them after the scandal. The day before the foreclosure was set to go through, Uncle Richard called me. I was in my corner office on the 40th floor of the Millennium Tower, looking out over Lake Michigan, when James buzzed me. Ms. Wells? Richard Mitchell is on line 1. He sounds desperate. I'd been expecting this call for months. Madison. His voice was broken, defeated.
Please.
We need to talk. Talk about what, Uncle Richard? About the house. About forgiveness. About family. I was quiet for a long moment, watching the boats on the lake far below. You want to talk about family? I said, finally. Let's talk about family. Family doesn't throw children away because they're inconvenient. Family doesn't lie about children who can't defend themselves. Family doesn't abandon family when they need them most. We made mistakes. You made choices, I corrected. Deliberate, calculated choices. And now you're facing the consequences of those choices. The house, it's been in our family for generations. If you foreclose, we'll lose everything. Everything. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Uncle Richard, 10 years ago, I lost everything. My parents, my home, my family, my sense of security, my belief that the world was fundamentally fair. And you know what I had left? $43 and the knowledge that the people who were supposed to love me had decided I wasn't worth the trouble. We were wrong, he whispered. We were wrong, and we're sorry. Are you sorry because you genuinely feel bad about what you did to a child? Or are you sorry because it's finally cost you something? The silence stretched between us. I thought so, I said. You have 24 hours to vacate the property. Madison, please. We have nowhere to go. Then I suggest you figure it out, I said, and hung up. The next day, the Mitchell family was evicted from their ancestral home. The Tribune ran a photo of them loading their belongings into a U-Haul truck while their former neighbors watched from behind curtains. The caption read, "The Mitchell family moves out of their foreclosed mansion after humiliating millionaire philanthropist Madison Wells, who turned out to own their mortgage." I bought a new house 6 months later. Not the Mitchell mansion, which I sold to a young family with 3 adopted children, but a beautiful Victorian in Lincoln Park with a garden where I could grow tomatoes and read in the morning sun. The Second Chance Foundation had grown beyond my wildest dreams. We'd helped place over 3,000 displaced youth in stable homes and educational programs. I'd been invited to speak at the UN about youth homelessness. Forbes had put me on their cover with the headline, "The Millionaire Who Remembers Being Nobody." I kept busy, but I also kept watch. Jessica had moved back in with her parents in their rental apartment on the north side. She was working at a department store, selling cosmetics to women who didn't recognize her from her viral Humiliation. She dyed her hair brown and wore drugstore makeup now. Brandon had taken a job with a small firm in Milwaukee, designing strip malls and suburban developments. His divorce had cost him half of what little he had left. He drove a 10-year-old Honda and lived in a studio apartment. Uncle Richard had taken a job as a foreman for someone else's construction company, the same type of work he'd started with 40 years ago. Aunt Caroline worked part-time at an upscale boutique, using her knowledge of fashion and social connections to sell clothes to the same women who'd once been her equals. They'd been humbled, broken down to the level they'd once assigned to me. But I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a kind of neutral closure, like watching a mathematical equation finally balance. A year after the foreclosure, Jessica found me. I was sitting in Lincoln Park on a Saturday morning, reading the Tribune and drinking coffee from my thermos, when she approached. She looked different, thinner, older, wearing jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. But her eyes still held that familiar Mitchell arrogance, buried now under layers of bitterness and defeat. Madison. I looked up from my paper. Jessica. She sat down on the bench beside me without invitation, staring straight ahead at the lake. "I've been thinking about you," she said. "About what happened. About everything." I waited. "Do you know what the worst part is?" she continued. "It's not the money. It's not even the humiliation, though that was pretty spectacular. It's that you were right." "Right about what?" "We are exactly who you said we were. Shallow, cruel people who judge everyone by their bank account and their address." She turned to look at me. I spent my whole life thinking I was better than everyone else because of what my parents had. But I never earned any of it. I never built anything, or helped anyone, or did anything that mattered. And now... She laughed bitterly. "Now I'm selling lipstick to suburban moms and living with my parents like I'm 16 again. The irony isn't lost on me." We sat in silence for a while, watching joggers pass by on the lakefront path. "I'm not apologizing," she said finally. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't think I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. What we did to you, it was unforgivable." "Yes," I said simply. "It was." She stood up, brushing off her jeans. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you made it. I'm glad you became everything we said you couldn't be." "Are you really?" She considered this for a moment. "Yeah," she said, and for the first time, she sounded like she meant it. "I am. Someone should win, you know? Someone should get the happy ending." She walked away then, disappearing into the crowd of Saturday morning park-goers, and I never saw her again. 5 years have passed since that night at the Fairmont Hotel. The Second Chance Foundation now operates in 12 cities across the Midwest. My investment firm manages over $1 billion in assets. I've been featured on the cover of Time magazine as one of America's most influential young philanthropists. But the victory I'm most proud of happened just last month. I was at another charity gala, this one for the symphony, when a young woman approached me. She was maybe 19, wearing a simple black dress that looked familiar. She had dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and nervous energy that reminded me of myself at that age. "Ms. Wells," she said quietly, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For the foundation. I was in the program 3 years ago when I aged out of foster care. Your scholarship got me through community college, and now I'm at Northwestern studying business." She smiled, and it lit up her whole face. "I want to do what you do someday. Help kids like us." Her name was Sarah, and she reminded me so much of myself at 19 that it almost hurt to look at her. Brilliant, determined, hungry for a chance to prove herself in a world that had written her off before she'd even begun. "Can I give you some advice?" I asked her. "Please." "The best revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's building something so beautiful, so meaningful, that their cruelty becomes irrelevant. It's helping other people, so they never have to feel what you felt." She nodded solemnly. "That's what you did, isn't it? You didn't just get rich to show them up. You got rich to help people like me." "People like us," I corrected. "And yes, that's exactly what I did." As I watched her walk away, confident, purposeful, ready to take on the world, I realized that this was my real victory. Not the money, not the recognition, not even the poetic justice of my family's downfall. It was this, turning my pain into other people's hope. The Mitchells had called me worthless, a nobody, a disgrace. They'd been wrong about everything except one thing. I didn't belong in their world. I belonged in a much better one. If you enjoyed this story of triumph over family betrayal, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more revenge stories, and let us know in the comments, have you ever had to prove your worth to people who underestimated you? Click the notification bell so you never miss our latest stories of justice and vindication.